Hello everyone, and happy Halloween! Rocket Wayne is here to join you as we read Bunnicula's Nighty Nightmare. Always remember that as we go through these amazing stories, all you have to do if you want to follow along is like and subscribe. Now I think that the little zookeeper will be perfect to join us for today's adventure. Now that the little zookeeper is here, let's jump in. Bunnicula's Nighty Nightmare. The adventure. It began on the bottom of a canoe in the middle of Boggy Lake, some 60 miles from home and 50 yards from solid ground. Gentle rocking of the boat was lulling me to sleep when I felt Mr. Monroe's hand come to rest on the spot between the tops of my ears where the hair goes every which way and the scalp seems to lie forever in wait for a little love and attention. I sighed. 3 pats usually led to some vigorous scratching, but this time something was different. Mr. Monroe didn't lift his hand after the second pat. Instead, he left it there for a flat, heavy, like an iron forgotten in the rush of attending to pressing matters. I looked up, hoping to hear that he'd grown tired of fishing and was ready to head back to the cabin and cook up some s'mores. Ever since Toby and Pete had introduced me to those gooey, crispy, chocolatey delights the summer before, I couldn't get enough. But s'mores were not what was on Mr. Monroe's mind. Alas, no, he was in a mood for reflection, and who better to share some moments? He was undoubtedly thinking than man's best friend himself. "Harold," he said, staring off into the pine trees, looking at Lake's edge, "I'm going to be 40 soon. You know what that means, don't you?" Birthday cake, I thought? It means half my life is over. Half my road is traveled. Half my songs are sung. I'd never thought about middle age that way before. Geez, I thought, half my naps were taken. I whimpered sympathetically. Mr. Monroe looked at me and smiled. "You understand what I'm talking about, don't you, old buddy?" In all the years I'd known him, he'd never called me old buddy. I mean, he's a college professor. This was serious. You know what we need? We need a little adventure, Harold. We need to do something we've never done before. Something we've always wanted to do in our youth, but never did. I never chewed a chair leg, I thought. That would be fun. Listen, boy, we're only here for a few days, but we still have time to do something new and adventurous and fun. Let's go on an overnight camping trip. We'll sleep out in the open under the stars. What do you think, Harold? Mosquitoes, I thought? Ticks, I thought? Cottleburs? I wasn't sure I liked that idea at all, but then something else occurred to me. S'mores. My tongue fell out of my mouth, and the next thing I knew, I was looking into Mr. Monroe's eyes and drooling. "That's the spirit, Harold," he said. "Let's go tell the others." The paddle hit the water with a sharp smack. Mr. Monroe's eyes glinted with determination as he carried us quickly to the shore. He wasn't simply homeward bound, however. He was bound for adventure, bound for recapturing his youth. I had no idea then that he had set his course well on what would prove to be the most terrifying night of my life. 10 minutes later, we were at the door of Lake Expectations, the Monroe's cabin retreat, named after Mr. Monroe's favorite book. The boys, who seemed to be the only ones around, came running when they heard their father crowd his news. I couldn't help noticing that despite their enthusiasm, they managed to keep their tongues in their mouths. "That is so cool," Pete shouted. "Can we go tonight?" "Yeah, Dad." "Can we?" Toby echoed. "I don't know," Mr. Monroe said, as we all went inside. "I've never done this sort of thing before. There's a lot of preparation involved." "Don't worry," said Pete. "I'll take charge." "Oh," said his father. "No, it's okay, really," Pete said, in a tone I'd heard him using a lot lately. "I've been reading up on camping. For my badge, see? I know all about this stuff." Mrs. Monroe came from the back porch then, carrying a chip pitcher full of buggy flowers. "Is this the secret project you've been working on?" she asked Pete. Pete shook his head. "That's a different merit badge." "Why can't you tell us about it?" Toby said. "Because it's none of your business, squirt." "Pete," said Mrs. Monroe, wiping the bottom of the pitcher with her hand and placing it on the table. "Well, it isn't fair," Pete said. "Toby thinks he has to do everything I do." "I'm a scout too," Toby said. Pete looked at his younger brother and laughed. "You're a bobcat," he said. "Anybody can be a bobcat." "Yeah, I guess so," Toby mumbled. "You were a bobcat once." "Boy," said Mrs. Monroe. "Robert?" "Right," Mr. Monroe said. "If we're going to go on an overnight, let's have some fun doing it. I don't know what your project is, Pete, but I see no reason why Toby can't help you out on this one. Why don't we get those camping books of yours, and we'll all pitch in. The sooner we're ready, the sooner we can leave." "Yippee!" Toby shouted. "Can the animals come with us?" "Oh, I don't know about that," Mrs. Monroe said. "They'll be fine here for one night." "But they'll miss all the fun," Toby said, and ran over and gave me a hug. "Harold wants to go too, don't you, boy?" I licked his ear. "See?" Mr. Monroe patted my head 3 times, and then he began to scratch. This was Harold's idea, almost as much as mine, he said. "I think he deserves to go." "It's not Harold I'm worried about," Mrs. Monroe said. "It's the other 2. "Mom," said Pete, "there are 3 of them and 4 of us. They'll be okay, really." Trust me, there was that tone again. It really dawned on me that he used it only with his parents. He rarely yelled at them anymore. Most of the time, he just smiled and spoke patiently, as if he'd discovered that they weren't as bright as they always let on. He seemed to be saying, "It's okay, your secret is safe with me. I can handle making all the decisions from now on." I think this change occurred certainly after he turned 11. "Well, alright," Mrs. Monroe replied, "but 4 people for 3 animals is 1 person too many. You 3 are in charge of them." "It's a deal," said Mr. Monroe. Mrs. Monroe swatted the bugs that migrated from the pitcher of the flowers to a nearby fruit bowl. "I'll run the store for supplies," she said, "while you fellas get the tents and sleeping bags in order. Do we even have a tent, Robert?" Mr. Monroe looked blankly at his wife. "No problem," said Pete. "Come on, Dad. I'll show you how we can make a simple tent out of a tart." "We do have a tart, don't we?" Mr. Monroe looked blankly at his son. I decided this would be a good time for me to leave. The family had their work cut out for them, and so did I. I had to break the news to Chester. "Camping on Boggy Lake?" Chester shouted when I told him, Didn't those bozos ever see Friday the 13th? Fair. "I don't see what a stupid horror movie has to do with real life," I said. "Chester, being a cat, needs to have his reality checked from time to time, the way car owners have their oil checks." Because he likes to read so much and watch all those movies on television, he's developed a reality leak that requires constant attention. "Oh, you don't, eh?" he said, squinting in a knowing sort of way. Or because the sun was right in his eyes. I couldn't tell which. Stories like that don't materialize out of thin air, you know. "I know that," I replied. Before I could say anything else, however, we were joined by Howie, who bounded up the stairs on the back deck and practically knocked Chester over on his eagerness to be part of the conversation. "I know where stories come from, Pop," he said, gasping for air. Howie was usually out of breath. In fact, when he first came to live with us less than a year ago, I'm sure he suffered from some sort of bronchial alignment. But then I remembered what I've been like as a puppy, and I realized he didn't have asthma after all. He was just young, and life was keeping him too busy to stop and catch his breath. I saw that Chester's eyes were closed. It wasn't the sun. It was the effect of being called Pop by a dog. After all this time, he wasn't used to it. To keep the conversation moving, I asked, "Where do you think the stories come from, Howie?" "Big buildings," he said simply. Even Chester had to open his eyes for that one. "Don't you remember," Howie explained? "We went to the vet 2 weeks ago when we were in the car, and Toby asked his father how many stories were in that new building downtown, and Mr. Monroe said 15, and there were 5 in the bank building, and 7 in the insurance building, and you're wanted on the telephone," Chester said. "Really?" said Howie. "Yes. Hurry inside. It's important." Howie didn't say another word, but padded off quickly with his little duck's hound legs through the back door into the kitchen. Chester must have seen my look because he said right away, "Spare me the lecture on cruelty to children, Harold. If I hadn't found a way to stop him, he'd have gone on forever." And I don't have forever. We have to talk about this camping trip the Monroes are planning. It's nice you're so worried about them, Chester, but it's not them I'm worried about. It's us. They're taking us with them, Harold, thanks to you and your little heart-to-heart with Mr. Monroe. I couldn't help it, I said. I pictured us all around the campfire, toasting marshmallows and singing songs. "Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Someone in the kitchen I know. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah." "Listen, Harold," Chester said, just as I was getting to the good part about the banjo. "While someone's in the kitchen with Dinah, have you thought about who's in the woods with us?" "What do you mean?" "The woods are full of spirits." "What woods?" "Any woods. They're dark places, Harold. Boring, evil creatures who prey on the innocent." "Do the Boy Scouts know about this?" I asked. Chester ignored me and went on. "This time of year is the worst. The 5th of May is St. George's Day, when midnight tolls the devil's sway." "That's pretty good," I said. "I wrote a poem once." "I didn't write that. I read it in a book." "Uh-oh." "I'm serious, Harold. This camping trip can only mean trouble." Just then, the screen door squeaked open and Howie popped out. "Boy, this camping trip is going to be fun," he said, running towards us. "You see all the neat stuff they're doing in there, Uncle Harold? First, Pete was showing his father how to sharpen a knife, and now he's teaching him first aid. It's lucky Mr. Monroe is light-handed." "First blood," Chester muttered. "What did you say, Pop?" Chester didn't say anything, I said. "Who called?" "What? Who wanted you on the phone?" "Oh, no one important. Just one of those surveys. They wanted to know which dog food I like best." Chester's eyes widened. "I worry about you sometimes," he said to Howie, and then he walked away. I knew what that meant. The Mr. Monroes don't have a telephone in the cabin. Howie went off to play, and I went around to the front of the house to find some sun. I settled on the front porch, napping for the next hour or so. Chester's worries were the furthest thing from my mind, and I probably wouldn't have thought about them again if I hadn't have been for all the newspaper Mrs. Monroe brought back from her from the store. As she was opening the door of the cabin, the paper fell out of her bag and landed a few inches from my nose. It wasn't the headline that caught my eye. It was the date. May 4th. We would be in the woods at midnight. Midnight of St. George's Day. Oh wow. That was a very interesting start with Bunnicula's Nighty Nightmare. What did you think, little zookeeper? I like that part too. We'll see you on the next adventure, okay? We'll see you on the next adventure here with Wayne Reads. I am Rocket Wayne, and I can't wait to join you on the next adventure. Bye-bye.